the first thing that I want to say is I'm not here to try and sell you licenses. So there'll be no license discussion. There'll be no product discussion. It's really to talk about what it is that we as Microsoft, as an organization, are doing to drive open source and how we actually work very closely with the open source community. Just to give you a brief introduction on myself, I'm the Information Worker Business Group Lead. So that's a really long title for something that's pretty simple. I look after the business that runs Office, Exchange, SharePoint, so our business productivity platform. My colleague in the audience, Sharif Sheta, is the Platform Strategy Manager, and we work very closely together. So initially when I was asked to come and actually speak at an open source conference, I thought, well, how are we going to be perceived here in Saudi? And we've done this a number of times, and we've been doing this for a good portion of 10 years in various other markets. And I think the important thing really to note is that as an organization, we've really been very, very involved in building open platforms. And I will clarify that statement in a minute. So when we think about the Open PC and the development of Microsoft as an organization way back in the early days, it is really about building a platform that can be extended and be expanded upon. And we obviously had Bill involved in kind of writing MS-DOS and taking the PC platform and building an operating system for it. All right? Moving away from those really rigid proprietary systems and moving into a more open environment. But as we've seen the development of the industry, and I remember back to my very first PC, an 8088 running, and I was running MS-DOS, old black and green screen. And as we kind of see the development of the technology and the development of Linux, for example, and Linux being obviously, I guess, the most perfect example of an open source development project, and this based out of Linus Torvalds wanting to build an OS for his machine, and not wanting to go ahead and utilize Unix. But as we kind of see the progress of this, as we're moving into a more open platform and open architecture within the web and Web 2.0, and making sure that we really have this concept of an open core, where we have the choice and the flexibility of our customers to choose whatever platform, whatever business model that they desire, and to ensure that ultimately all these technologies and all these products integrate and work together out of the box. So our desire and our goal is not to convert every single developer to be a Microsoft developer. Our goal is not to convert every customer to be a Microsoft customer, because we realize that we have these heterogeneous environments. And we have really strong alliances and collaborations with a multitude of different entities across the industry. So today, the concept of open is really not necessarily about Microsoft versus the rest of the industry, and it's not necessarily about Microsoft versus Linux. All right, it's really about making sure that we understand where we reside as each one of the various vendors and the various role players within the industry. So whilst open source software today is equal to Linux and Linux is equal to OSS, it is not the only definition that we work on. Because today for us, we have a lot of really strong and really good open source projects that run on a Windows platform. And so the message is pretty clear, is that open source development and open source software is a development model. It's a development practice, not necessarily a technology or a vendor choice. And we've got some great vendors, Red Hat. We work very closely with the likes of Ubuntu. We work very closely with the likes of Novell and SUSE on the Linux side. But we also work really closely with some of the other developers around some of the open source CRM applications. When we think about some of the education solutions that are built on open source. And we have a lot of open source development that we incorporate, that we actually promote and encourage organizations to use, which runs on top of our existing platforms. So just because a product is built on open source, and just because that licensing model and that choice of how we've actually desired to protect the intellectual property, because that runs within an open source environment, does not necessarily mean that it has to run on Linux. And I think that is really the clarification that we wanted to make sure. When we think about some of the top 10 open source projects today that are out there. All right. There's many of them that are actually running on the Windows environment, and running successfully on the Windows environment. And so yes, whilst Linux is a great product, all right, and what the various distributors do to kind of bundle services and support and products and technologies around that kernel, all right, what is really important for us is really what is the business value that we're able to go ahead and drive over and above just the immediate piece of technology and the open source technology. Let's look beyond just the platform. Let's look beyond the operating system. And what is a solution that we're able to go ahead and provide to our customers? So when we think about the open source platform today and the large number of projects that are running, well, we have Mozilla, MySQL, Ruby, Java, Samba, Apache, PHP, Python, Eclipse, a range of these products, and a range of these solutions that have been built. And this is just to name a few. We have a range of other products and technologies, and I'll kind of revert to those and talk a bit about those in a minute. The one thing that drives us as an organization is really about what our customers are demanding from us. Our customers are demanding lower cost. Our customers are demanding flexibility. Our customers are demanding choice from us. And that's really what gets us up in the morning. That's what we develop for. We develop to make sure that we're providing our customers that freedom of choice. Choice of how you want to deploy that product. Choice of how you want to license that product. Choice of which particular platform you're wanting to actually go ahead and incorporate and embrace, whether it be a hosted platform or whether it be an on-premise platform. When we look at that choice option, when we look at the options around choice, it's about which particular partner do we want to go ahead and adopt? Which particular solution on top of your particular platform do we want to adopt? And customers have the flexibility and the choice today to say, well, if I choose to have an open source initiative in my organization, well, I can choose to run this on a Windows platform. I can also choose to integrate this into some of the back-end solutions, and I can choose to actually use a proprietary management solution to manage my open source environment. And that's the level of flexibility and the level of choice that we're referring to and we're talking to with our customers. Customers today can choose how they're wanting to go ahead and license those products, whether they're wanting to take that open source approach or a proprietary approach. And in fact, I met a customer, in fact, last week out in Jubail that has recently gone ahead and actually embraced a whole array of open source technologies. And we commended him it's a great solution that he's built. And we're still working with that customer to help them with ERP solutions. We're working with them to help them with things like business intelligence solutions. So being able to go ahead and embrace both approaches and all technologies and all platforms and bring them in together. The other thing that open source does kind of drive, and we also embrace that, is competitiveness. We know that we can both learn from each other in multiple areas. So whilst I guess the open source community has learned from things that we've done, both good and bad, we equally learn from the open source community on things that have been done, both good and bad. And when we look at how we've learned on what we do around security, building secure platforms, building secure products, we have a really rich process that we run through on every single one of our technologies to ensure that we have security embedded in from the core and it's not attached after the fact. But likewise, and I think when we look at the open source community in terms of our development practice, and when we look at our intellectual property, then I think we've actually also been able to go ahead and adopt what some of the open source community have done. And we've licensed our products in a way we have a shared source model. So education environments, public sector or government bodies have the ability to actually gain access to Microsoft source code, all right, under certain NDAs and certain agreements that we sign. So no binding contract, well, no contract in terms of from a monetary perspective, but we're able to go ahead and sign up to say, you want to see what's happening in the source code and under the hood? Well, we have our shared source model where we can actually go ahead and license those components to various entities as well. So we view open source as a key way of us meeting the challenges of customers: openness, flexibility, and that level of choice. I think the other thing that customers want